Hi guys, and welcome to number 48, episode number 48 of the PT Education Podcast. Very exciting today. I've gone fucking Joe Rogan because there's a mic in my face and headphones on my ears, which is an upgrade from normally. How are you, James? You're normally very excited about this sort of stuff?
I'm very excited, mate. Yeah, I feel fucking like a muppet, if I'm honest. I'm not used to having these headphones on. I look like because I've got a little pea head. Yeah. If anyone's watching this, apologies because I've got a small head and big set of headphones. It's not the right look. But anyway, I'm excited. We're in London. We've travelled out. We've got a lovely guest we've just been catching up with.
We have.
And but before we start introducing him, Daniel, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm looking forward to today. It's a big day. Well, it's not actually.
Is it? It's just a Friday.
It's just a Friday.
Don't overbig it
too much. We're doing a podcast, but it's our first time in a podcast studio. I've just been told by our
Dan's fucked up already by having the mic too far.
Who is actually much more experienced than us. That I've had the mic too far away. So apologies about that. If you couldn't hear me, I'm in. So I'm excited about today. It's excited to be in the podcast studio, and we'll go for a bit of dinner afterwards. So looking forward to that. Now our guest, which we're very excited to announce or introduce. We'll go introduce because we already announced you. And actually, it's the first time I've met this person in person, which I mentioned to him today because although I'm currently coaching with him, he's coaching me and we've done some courses together. We haven't actually met in person. So welcome, Mr. Paul Standell. How are you, mate?
Thanks very much for having me, guys. Yeah, I was quietly over here being like, Dan, get that microphone nearer your face. He was trying to talk to it from across a room. And one of the first things we learned is, get it so close you could lick the microphone. So, there you go.
Yeah,
that's the noise.
Is that an acting tip from the previous life?
Yeah.
There we go.
You learn about.
We can learn all sorts from you, Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate. What's that? What Paul was just demonstrating to me. I'm a bit sceptical.
Yeah. We call it the blowjob position for the microphone.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense to James with his crotch shot on the YouTube channel.
Well, it wasn't down to me, mate. The bloke wanted to zoom in certain areas. It's like, easy, son. It's not about me. It's about a guest.
It's about crotch shot. So, Paul, how are you? You've come back in from travelling around the country by the sound of things. While we're
schlepping around. But this place is very nice. The guys are getting more professional. Clearly, they're doing well.
We're stepping up.
Yeah.
We are stepping up.
We're not fucking about, Paul.
No, I can tell.
You can tell, mate. You can tell I'm serious, aren't we?
You can tell by the way we started. It's super professional, super serious. No
serious.
fucking about. We're going to get straight into it. I think where I'd like to start, Paul, is a lot of our listeners are new personal trainers in the industry or personal trainers making their way through the industry. And one of the things that we're highly passionate about is helping those people, because certainly earlier in my career, sometimes I found it hard to know where to go for good quality information. So it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to. It's, well, what is a good course? What is the next area of expertise I need? Where do I go? And I sort of, with that, it sort of almost ended going nowhere. And so that's one of our big passions. And I think the first question I've got for you is, what makes, do you think, a good general population coach or trainer? What skills do you think you need?
That is a good question.
Solid start.
That's a very solid
He's straight in with it, isn't he? Could have put you an easy, Paul.
I should have prepared stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the reason it's a great question is because I think there's multiple ways you can start to answer it. I don't know that there's, it'd be easy to sit here as someone who teaches biomechanics to be like, biomechanics is obviously where you need to start with this. Yeah. And I will have a bias towards saying that. But I think there's going to be multiple things. When you're training Gen Pop people and when I hear young trainer or new trainer, I think kind of young trainer for the most part.
Yeah.
There are people who come into it later who become a PT when they're in their 30s, in their 40s, etc. I actually think those people have a bit of an advantage in many respects because they've got a bit more life experience. But most of the young trainers are going to be in their early 20s type thing. And the reason they've got into it is because they're excited by training themselves. And so one of the main complaints or concerns you hear from young trainers is frustration. They feel like they want it more than their clients want it. And I was there. I'm pretty confident you guys have probably been in a similar boat. And the mistake is, it's not that you're not caring, you're clearly caring, but the mistake is projecting your expectations and your goals onto someone else. So there's an idea in there that learning to listen, learning to try and see the world through your client's eyes is a really important skill. And that means conversation and asking questions. And it's a difficult thing to know because it's not like you can just follow a script. It's not like there's a predetermined answer for way of doing that. It's just a skill you have to kind of practice and learn to be like, okay, so they've said this thing back. Okay, can I say their goal back to them or what they've just said to me in a way that they would agree with and try and make sure we're roughly on the same page? Because when lots of Gen Pop clients come to you initially, lots of what they will say will be very vague. I want to be fitter, I want to be healthier, etc. And we all go, okay, but if assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups, as Steven Seagal once taught us, then we need to make sure that we're trying to stay away from them as much as we can, which means we need to have a conversation and go, okay, when you say fitter, what do you mean by that? When you say healthier, what do you mean by that? What does that look like to you? And how do we have a conversation about that? So I think that element goes a hugely long way in the young trainer's career so that they don't get too frustrated and annoyed themselves. I almost don't want to say it's bad because it means you care. And I think you don't want to go so far that you're completely apathetic and ambivalent about whatever your client's doing. Like there's a balance here, I think. Like you want to be invested in what your client does, but you want to make sure that you're sort of seeing it how they want to see it and how they're doing in relationship to their goals, not what you think their goals should be. So that's part of it. I then do think biomechanics because I'm biased towards thinking that. But one of the reasons I'm biased towards thinking that is I think I could have hacked off. This is, I think, my 12th year in this industry. I could have hacked off like half of my career and gotten to a very similar boat by learning some more of this stuff. Because when people employ you, certainly in the gym side of things, training is biomechanics. It's the study of forces being applied to this person in front of you and understanding when a squat is appropriate or what you might do to it, or when a bench press is and what you might do to it, or when a cable exercise is, or when a machine is. And that ability to adjust an exercise in real time so that it creates an experience for the client that is undeniably awesome for them is, I think, the best sales technique you'll ever have on the gym floor, the best way of retaining clients, the best way we're working with a wide range of clients. And okay, the training isn't going to cause fat loss particularly, right? And most Gen Pop clients are going to come to you for some sense of fat loss to some degree. And so you're going to have a conversation about behavior change, and that comes back to listening. And then we need a bit of an understanding of nutrition. You need all those things. But in terms of what makes someone come to you twice a week, 3 times a week for years and years and years on end, it's the ability to create a great training experience that they value. That means, does it work around their issues? Look, most Gen Pop people who can afford you are going to be in their 30s and 40s. And most people in their 30s and 40s have some joint issues and things that kind of niggle. And so that ability to work around and be like, oh, that actually feels really nice now for the first time. Dude, if you can create that sentence to come out of their mouth, the odds of you getting that person as a client go way, 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 way up. And you don't need many of them to have a really successful career that is quite financially rewarding. If you've got 20 clients doing 2 sessions a week, that's all you need. Yeah. That's literally all you need. And that doesn't take that long to get. So the other skills, I think, super important, but they take longer to pay off in terms of you building a successful business. So I'd probably start with that. And I could waffle on about other things, but I reckon I've probably. So hopefully,
well, the reason you speak right to our bias with both of those points, as our listeners will know, is that I have a bias towards biomechanics as well. Found it incredibly helpful to progress my sessions and help my clients. And James's big passion is psychology and communication. So I think we'd both go for those 2 things as a starting point as well, wouldn't we, mate?
Yeah, I mean, what I liked about that was Paul starting with understanding the person, understanding their values, understanding what's important to them, going, this isn't about me, projecting what I give a shit about onto the client, what's important to them. It's listening, it's understanding, it's navigating that. You don't get the answers instantly. As Paul said, the first answers are quite surface level, and eventually you start, because clients don't know at first often, and then you start to dig a bit deeper, the relationship develops, and you're like, this is really what you care about, isn't it? And they're like, yeah, well, let's gear exercise and your health around these values, and it's trying to have better alignment. And I think that's what Paul's saying, and I'll totally agree with that.
Yeah, and it's a good place to start as well, because I don't know about you, Paul, but certainly over the years, when I think about the trainers I've worked with, if I think about the most knowledgeable person, or I think about the person that made people feel good and who they really enjoyed spending time with, in my opinion, if you can do both, then superb. But if it's one or the other, the busier person tended to be the person who people just enjoy being around, right? And they get them and they understand them and they communicate well.
And you've got to be careful as well, because if you're pretty much everyone in this room is a bit of a nerd. Right? And so there is, hopefully...
Speak for yourself, mate.
I've seen those jeans. Nerds don't wear those. But, so we've probably got a bit of... Hopefully we're not terrible with people as well. I don't think anyone in this room comes under that category of like shy, awkward dude sat in the corner with a calculator. But... we certainly have a bias towards wanting to know the whys and all those bits. And in my experience, that type of trainer can easily become a bit bitter and a bit resentful of the busy trainer who they don't think is a very good trainer. Yeah. But they're like, but they're undeniably busy. And I can almost promise you the reason is because they're great with people.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. It's like when you build one of the things before I sort of got into really geeking out, I was an awful salesperson. So like really shit. Like really shit. Like
do you want to buy something? No, okay then.
Well, that's literally what I was like.
It's good
okay,
that Dan
bye-bye.
opened a gym.
So what I did, yeah, and then poor shit. And then so the way I went around it was just, well, I enjoy talking to people, I enjoy helping people, so I'm just going to go around the gym floor and not try and sell anything. I'm just going to talk to people, I'm going to know their names, I'm going to help them if they've got any questions, and hopefully at some point, if they want PT or a friend wants PT, they go, I don't know, Dan, he seems like a good bloke, why don't you go and do some PT with him?
Yeah, 100%. And I also I think within that, because I'm definitely in a similar boat, and I think probably most trainers don't love selling.
Yeah.
Because people who love selling are already in sales and marketing gigs as it is. And, you know, making that transition in your head from this isn't about a sale, it's about how do I help this person is the most useful shift I think you can make in actually, ironically, then selling to people. But it comes from a different place. It's not about trying to sell them. It is actually about trying to help them. But then it's going to come back to, well, do you actually have the skill set to do that?
Yeah.
And so we're going to come back to the same two things that we started the conversation with, which is probably biomechanics and listening.
Biomechanics and listening. And it's because we do have a bias towards biomechanics, and it's so important that we don't miss out on the communication and the listening, because I think sometimes, you know, when I'm talking about it and I've got a bias for it and I find I'm super passionate about it, and very rarely do you find when you're having a biomechanics conversation with a trainer that they don't get fired up and they're interested in it as well, and that we don't miss that communication and that side of things of just being interested in people and genuinely interested in people, not just asking questions because you need to ask a question, but actually listening to them. And for a lot of people, it's their hour that's for them. And not a lot of people have that, right? So it's all about them, and being able to actually listen and engage in conversation with them is super important.
If you have a client for 8 years, 10 years type thing, and if you've been doing this a while, you will have those clients. You know, I only stopped in-person PTing a couple of months ago. And so my longest serving clients have been with me 10 years. You know, by that point, they're clients because they like spending time with you, not necessarily because they love training. Like, yeah, you still want to create a training experience for them. But often by this point as well, they're like 50-something, 60-something. You know, I tend to, you know, slightly sarcastically describe it as you're helping them die slower, right? Like, they've not got these massive, giant goals that they've got from a health perspective. They're trying to live longer. I think it's funnier when you say die slower, right? And so the reason they're turning up, they like spending time with you. You should know about their family. You'll know about the things that they care about. Some people have this bullshit idea in training that you shouldn't become friends with your clients, right? It's all about results. And so, well, it depends on who you deal with. Yeah. If you're like an online coach, maybe that's more the case. Or if you want to be someone who specializes in transformations, maybe that's more the case. But I'll still say that most people I know, even who get good transformations, their service is improved by caring about the other person, and that means getting to know them, and it means all the things you fucking think that it should mean. Like, you want, generally speaking, it's a way better experience for both me and the client if I like the other person and they like me. And that's kind of really just about having a friendship that is then previously, it's been built on the idea of, well, they respect what I do, and I've got this skill set, and they value all those things. If that's already in place, there's no harm in being friendly on top of that thing. It doesn't undermine you or change any of those bits and pieces because you weren't a dictator in the first instance. You know, I tend to see the role of a PT, especially in person, but really in any type of situation, as an advisor. I can't make you do anything. I've not got a gun, and I'm not going to carry it around and stick it to your head if you don't eat some broccoli, right? So it's more that case of going, look, what do you want? Okay, I think I understand what your goal is. I'll kind of repeat that back. Is that roughly about right? Okay. Let's try and then understand their life and the things that might get in the way of them achieving that, and try and come up with a bit of a plan and a strategy towards achieving said goal in a reasonable way for them. And then going, okay, well, we could do this or we could do this, and here's the consequences of approach A, here's the consequences of approach B. Either can work. What do you think? So can I involve you in that conversation? And people do better when you involve them in the solutions to their own problems. And so you kind of do that thing. Well, none of that is dictatorial. Like, I haven't told you should do anything. I just said, if you want that thing, here's a couple of different things we could do to get it. Which one do you think suits you best? If you don't want to do any of those things, then we might not be able to achieve that goal. None of that means I can't be friends with you.
No. Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is two things. The podcast we did have those about building relationships. I think essentially what Paul's talking about there is building quality relationships. And a part of that is, you mentioned listening, but good quality communication. And the micro part of communication, you're talking a lot about reflecting there. That's something we talk a lot about in our seminars, the ability to listen and actually reflect back to the client what they've told you. That's so powerful. If you've ever had that done to you, I know I have in therapy, and it's just really powerful to hear your own words said back to you, maybe paraphrased, maybe with maybe a more reflective lens. It's you can see you nodding your head there, Paul. I think you can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's been through therapy as well, 100%. To the point, do you get this? Like, it makes me laugh sometimes when I hear someone doing it to me. Yeah. Where I'm like, I know what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, because you're more aware, aren't you? When you've gone through those processes, your lens is altered forever, isn't it? And
exactly.
It's a powerful thing to be able to do once you've experienced it yourself. It's like when you train and you experience the muscle engagement you do, you're like, God, fuck me, yeah, I'm feeling good. I'll show my client this now. And kind of when you experience it yourself, you want to help other people experience it as well.
Well, I think it's that bit of are you listening, and it's cliched, but are you listening to understand, or are you listening to just reply and say something that you've prepackaged that you know the answer to already? And I'm not saying we all do that sometimes. Of course we do. I have some prepackaged ideas I'm sure I'm parroting now. But if you're actually engaging in that process of actively listening to your client and trying to reflect it back, why am I doing it? Well, I'm doing it because my disposition in this moment is, how do I help this person who's paying me money to help them? And if I can go in with that idea, well, the best solutions to a problem are built on a thorough understanding of the problem. And so the only way we're going to get to do that, if half of the issues are about the behavior that the person does or does not engage with, well, the only way I can get towards that is by having a discussion with them. It's a psychological problem. And so they're the person with the answer to their psychological life. And I don't know whether we need to change some of their environmental stuff, or whether we need to have a conversation about how they actually think about things and a cognitive stuff. I don't know whether we need a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. Like, I can't know the answer to any of that shite without them first starting to talk to me.
It's that mindset of just going, I'm really interested in you.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Let me understand this. And once your client can see that, you're kind of navigating it together, because they don't always know the answers and you don't. And you're just exploring a conversation because, as you said earlier, you give a shit. You're like, I just want to understand a bit more. When you say this, what do you really mean, or what's going on here? And it's something that I have a bias towards. My bias is definitely trying to understand people better psychologically. And it's been a game changer in my sort of one-to-one business, I must admit.
Yeah. And sometimes I get kind of curious because we all have our biases. And I think it's a useful thing sometimes to go, all right, when might my bias be wrong? Like, when could it be that I'm almost asking too many questions and I'm going into a realm where, do you know what, we haven't got the time and I'm not necessarily the right person to help navigate that thing. And, I'm reminded, I've had one male client who had an eating disorder past, right? I've had plenty of female clients. It is more common in females, but I had one who had a history of anorexia. And to this day, when I think about how I was engaged with that person, I'm like, oh, God. I definitely did him a disservice. Sorry, Mike. And, those bits of getting him to, track stuff and, I'd asked him, I was like, well, do you think that'd be okay for you? He was like, yeah, right. And we just kind of made him, he definitely got worse in spite of what we were kind of trying to do. And now I've lost where I went in on this conversation. What was the setup?
Well, you're talking about sort of own biases and sort of maybe not seeing them.
Yes,
and going so deep.
That's where I was going. Thank you. And I think sometimes we almost had too many conversations about it, and not enough were just about, all right, there should have been some sensible shit. Let's try and train where there aren't many mirrors. Let's not be getting him to weigh himself. Let's not be probably at that point tracking his food, but we can make some maybe behavioral interventions. Just have a protein shake after you finish training might have been a perfectly good place to start with him. Let's have those conversations about what seems reasonable and realistic. Let's reflect the idea that, okay, dude, given this past, and this isn't news to him, I'm wary of a couple of these things coming up, but I think it might be really interesting for us to try not to engage with that stuff as much as possible. And I say this, so my own background involves obsessive compulsive disorder, so OCD. And one of the trends we definitely see, not just in fitness, but in the psychological world in general at the moment, is the importance of talking. And, that's undeniably true to an extent, because you don't really know what's wrong with you until you start having a discussion, because you don't really know all the things that could be out there. You're usually super unaware of the fact that you even think about stuff in a particular manner, and that might be distorted in a particular way, and that might be at the root of some of your unhappiness and some of your problems. But one of the great ironies of treating OCD is the standard cognitive behavioral therapy stuff that you use and learn to treat anxieties, depressions, and the like, is almost the antithesis of how you treat OCD. OCD treatment is about not engaging with stuff. And so when you keep your thought diary and you challenge your thoughts and you put your thoughts on trial and you come up with rational alternatives, that's still interacting with that thought. It's giving it credence. And actually, if we want to, I liken it to ignoring a small toddler. Like sometimes by the time you realize you've got a problem, and this can be true for some of the eating disorder stuff too. By the time you realize you've got a problem, that toddler is like a little bastard who's dominating your attention the whole time. He's constantly screaming. He's always getting his own way. And you're like, shit, he's 2.5 now, and he's turning into a bit of a monster.
He's already a little shit.
Yes. You're like, oh, maybe I need to change this. The problem is, he's for 2.5 years been getting his own way and gotten used to this thing. So when you try not to engage with him when he's wanting to get his own way, he's not going to go along with it straight out the gate. He's going to start screaming and crying. And so when you start learning these strategies and tactics for OCD of going, right, let's not interact with that thought, which doesn't mean, oh, fuck me, I'm interacting with thought. Oh, you're not supposed to be doing that. That's still interacting with the thought. It's literally a case. It's a hard thing to describe, but you kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, what was I thinking about? What was I focusing on? What mindfulness technique can I use? What sensation can I pay attention to? What was I previously doing, etc.? But that's so much easier said than done when the toddler is screaming in the corner of the room for your attention. But if you don't go through that phase, the toddler doesn't learn that this doesn't work anymore and gradually starts to quiet down. And so those first couple of weeks of implementing that can often be worse, not better. But annoyingly, there's no kind of good way around that thing. But it brings back the concept and the idea of sometimes actually talking about it more and interacting with it more isn't always the solution to those particular problems. But the only way you can even know that is to have had a discussion in the first instance. So you're kind of left with this bit of going, we need to talk because there's no getting around that bit, because otherwise we're going to make assumption. But we should also be keeping in mind to some degree, that doesn't mean it's going to fix everything just because we talk, just because we listen well, just because we reflect well, because that's just not the case. If that was the case, then, you know, we'd have yacht money because I could solve everyone's problem.
And human beings are so complex.
Yeah.
I think if we try and oversimplify them and go, look, A equals B equals C, it's just not going to happen. So, yeah, it's, I don't know about you, but when I look back at my career, I think I'm 15th year in now, and I'm thinking of all the ways that I would have done things differently. But also I know in 10 years' time, I'll think that same about now.
Yeah.
And go, actually, as long as I'm just trying to get better and trying to have that open mindset to go, yeah, I'll make a few fuck ups. I might talk too much one time or not talk enough. That's okay. As long as I'm reflecting, I mean, Dan talked a lot about reflecting on the podcast, then I feel like I'm always improving as a coach, and hopefully the guys that we're trying to help as well are improving by just going, look, we all make fuck ups and that's okay. And also, what's a fuck up? I think if you're growing and developing through reflecting and not judging yourself, I think you're moving forward.
Well, I think it's, you know, success has to be pragmatically defined in these things. If it worked, then it was right. Yeah. And if it didn't work, I don't care what your theory was, it did not work. And so, you know, if you're, hopefully, yes, we should look back on where we are now and go, I'd have done things a bit differently. But that should happen less frequently than it did in your early career. When you look at your early career, almost everyone goes, fuck me.
What was I program ever wrote? State of that.
Fuck me, my mum could have written that.
Yeah. I just wanted to take you back a little bit to the non-judgmental thing and the dictator thing. I think it's super important because sometimes I think in your early career we can become slightly dictatorial because we don't understand, we don't have much life experience, and then we're seeing these people that have much more life experience than us. And I think it's so important to create that autonomous relationship because you need the honesty from the client. Say at the moment we're coaching, and if I wasn't able to be open and honest with you and I'd plateaued or whatever, then I'm not able to tell you. Then how are you able to help me if I'm not giving you the full picture? Yep. In fact, I'm not utilizing your skills because I'm not telling you what the problem is. But in a dictatorial relationship where you feel you can't let this person down, this person's perfect, they have these high expectations, I don't want them to think less of me, you're not going to be able to have that relationship that you need. So it's almost like it's even more important to be autonomous so that you create that non-judgmental environment.
Yeah, I think judgment sometimes, we can look at it in a couple of different ways, right? There's the judgment, the judgmental side of things that I think most of us think when you hear the word, oh, he's judgmental, right? And then there's an element of judgment, to be a judge, to be judicial, that is positive. And your clients are paying you to judge things. The technique on that was pretty good. You're doing this really well. We could improve that a little bit. So there's undeniably an element of judgment involved in any coaching relationship of any kind. And then there's well, you're just being an asshole. Yeah. And I think it's important to differentiate first off between those two bits. I think you're probably looking, most clients, in my experience, like their coach to walk the walk a bit and to actually put them on a small pedestal. And I would emphasize small pedestal, right? Someone who is leading. You know, what is the difference, I suppose, between being a leader who's looking forward and being someone who's just up on a fucking plinth, like Nelson's column? And if the client didn't look at you and think, this person can help me and knows the way and has some kind of stuff that I value, they probably wouldn't hire you in the first instance. So, you know, I don't think we need to remove the idea that they are placing us as someone who can direct us and guide us in a particular manner. But we also don't want that to be dictatorial. It is still a conversation between those things. It is still possible to be an example to your clients through your actions for the most part, and for them to want to aspire to some of those things. Like most coaches I know, and most clients I've ever had, and I think this is probably true of most of them, generally feel like they don't want to let their coach down most of the time. And I don't know that that's bad, provided they feel okay telling the coach when they fuck up.
Yeah.
Right? And I think if you can find that balance, and God, you're never going to get it right all the time. And even if you were perfect, even if you were super empathetic, super compassionate, super open yourself, that's still no guarantee that the other person is going to feel okay telling you all their stuff. Like, it's an art, it's a skill, it's a bit of luck, it's a bit of timing to get all those things in the right place. I think if you're trying to get your client to be okay opening up with you, open up yourself is one of the best things that you can start to kind of do within that. Like, if you're trying to get someone to just delve a little deeper into either what their goals are or what they're struggling with, you know, actually being honest and open and recognizing, well, you don't fucking live on a plinth, dude, and you have stuffed your face and you have binged before, and tell them the story of the times when you fucked up and laugh and smile a little bit and be kind of human about it. Usually, but not always, people will be more receptive to starting to tell you their stuff as well. So I think it's that balance of being an example while being human at the same time. I think that's probably what it is.
It's actually a really good thing. It's a good way of putting it as well, because most clients, when they start with a coach, especially general population, and they're going to want that coach to be in half decent shape, right? Yeah. There's the aesthetic aspect to it. And I think you did a post, and this was one of the shots, is like, do you have to be in amazing shape to be a great coach? Maybe not. But for the vast majority of people, they're going to want to know that you're interested in training, that you keep yourself fairly fit. And as you say, that you are an example. And I know that, your coaching skills don't necessarily just come down to that, but it is a big part of it as well.
Well, I think I differentiate this into theoretical knowledge and experiential knowledge. So you don't have to have walked any path to have theoretical knowledge of something. But that's still a far cry from having done it yourself and knowing what it feels like. And a lot of coaching is about, you never fully know what someone else is experiencing, and we can go quite badly wrong if we assume and presume that we do. But it tends to be something that connects us and binds us when we share common stories of something and can point out, yeah, look, this is what this feels like. It feels a bit worse. You're not alone. This is normal to have gone through this thing. Here's some ways of starting to deal with it. And usually, if someone's trying to get in great shape, they want a six-pack type thing, it helps to be able to empathize with the level of hunger that they're going to start experiencing towards the end of that, and being like, look, those strategies that we used at the start when we were carrying a bit more body fat, they're not going to work so well at this point, right? We're going to have to be a bit stricter with some stuff, because odds are you're going to end up down aisle 4 of Tesco eating all of the bakery goods. Because trust me, dude, I've been there, right? And most clients have. So there's that thing that, you can't know that shit without having walked it and done it yourself. It's one thing maybe to have like a physics degree and to know the math behind firing a rocket, and it's still another thing to fire a rocket. And so I think the best coaches, depending on what the goal that you're selling clients is, have a combination of both of those things. They have been through those types of experience, and they also understand the science and the theory and everything else kind of behind them. So
yeah, I think it can work both ways. I think developing that skill of empathy through your own life experiences, in this case, getting fucking shredded is uncomfortable. You're like, yeah, mate, you're going to want to fucking smash a bakery. But also, there's another side to it where you can end up coming non-empathetic. Well, I fucking sucked up and got on with it. Why can't you? Fucking hell. Come on, Betty. Get a fucking... Aren't you hungry? Well, I was all right with it. But we can end up... Yes. It can work the other way as well, I think, Paul.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And that's that bit of going... Just because we think we have some shared experience and understanding of what someone means with a sentence doesn't mean that we actually understand their experience with it. We still have different genetic responses to those things. We still have different experiences. We still have different ways of thinking about it. You know, when, to bring it back to an OCD point, because it's a point I know well, back in I think it was the 70s, when there were early stages of OCD research, they wanted to know, is it the types of thought that are the problem in obsessive compulsive disorder, or is it something else? It's a really easy study to run. You get a bunch of people with OCD to write down all the upsetting shite that jumps into their head across the course of a week, and then you get a bunch of people without OCD to also write all the shit that jumps into their head across the course of a week. You just jumble up the answers. You get your research to be like, pick the crazy people. And they can't. It's not the type of thought that dictates the problem. It's the frequency with which that person has those thoughts, the severity of the emotional response, the magnitude of the meaning attached to those particular things, how distressing they find it to have that. And, you know, or we could do the same with an obesity type thing. We all know what it's like to be hungry, right? But that doesn't mean we understand the size, magnitude of that hunger and how long it affects them for and how hard they find it to not interact with that particular thing. And you can see that in stuff like fMRI research, where, you know, you scan someone's brain when you show them pictures of donuts and shit. And for obese people, it seems like it lasts in the brain for longer and might be a bit bigger than for people who don't struggle with their weight. So if we were saying, you know, there's a certain amount of willpower required, it's really hard to define willpower. And so I don't think it's nothing, but I also I don't really know what it is either. I think we all kind of go, there's something like willpower, but fuck knows what it is. You know, but if there is that thing, well, maybe for person A, they require 3 units of willpower to resist this person. Whereas someone else who might look identical to them and might look completely different requires 6 units of willpower to do the same thing. And so we all have a finite capacity and tolerance for any of these things. And we have to be really cautious in going, I experienced this, therefore I definitely know what you experienced. And then we're back at conversation again, because the only way for me to check that I'm understanding you is to ask you and to have those particular conversations. So you're absolutely right in pointing out that it can be a double-edged sword, and you've got to be conscious of that.
I think we're talking about here is kind of when people are struggling in, you're talking about like OCD stuff or dieting or just anything that's challenging, everyone's going to react to that differently. And I think you said the word meaning there, and it's kind of like, well, what does that struggle mean to that person? And the meaning and the narrative they give that struggle might dictate how they behave to that struggle. They might think, oh, you know what? Yeah, I've got this. I'm good. Yeah, I can handle a bit of discomfort. It means that I'm getting leaner. Someone else might go, shit, I'm hungry. It means I'm going to fucking die. You know, it's that meaning of the sensation, the struggle is, as you said, that comes out in conversation.
And it also changes at times in your life. I don't know about you boys, but I've been in preps that during a breakup type thing, and the prep has been something for me to focus on and was actually a useful distraction. And then I've had another prep that I abandoned because I was like, I can't seem to focus on this. Well, in both instances, I was going through a breakup, and in both instances, there was a photo shoot at the end of it. Under one set of circumstances, and who knows why, it was useful for me. And then another set of circumstances, a year or two later, whatever it was not useful to me. And so past predictions of it aren't still indicative of definitely what that person is going to experience this time around. I mean, how many times do we see that with dietary approaches or whatever? I used to do this, and this used to work for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a perfectly reasonable place to start. Why would you start on something that didn't used to work for you, right?
Yeah.
But you've got to have that ability to look at it and still go, just because it used to work doesn't mean you're the same person here. There's an old Greek guy called Heraclitus who said, no man steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man. And the point is true. The environment has changed and you have changed. And maybe a small amount, in which case the last approaches are just fine. Or maybe a large amount and you're missing a leg now. And so, right, we need to change some of those bits and pieces.
I was just thinking when you're talking about relating to clients earlier, I remember when clients have struggled sort of with their drinking behaviours and they told me about their stresses and stuff. And sometimes I've gone, you know what, fucking don't blame me for having a drink. I'd have a drink after day after that. And they're straight away like, James is on side. I'm like, yeah, brilliant glass of wine. And they're like, bloody, I'm not getting judged here. You can sometimes make depending on the context of the conversation, you could make a bit of a joke out of it, you could not. But straight away they feel like you're in this together. You're like, that's a tough day. Like, I don't blame you for cracking over a vodka. I'll probably do the same thing. You know, like, you piss it, James. No. I'm all right, mate. Talk about booze, James.
I did a post a while ago on, a client of mine who struggled with their weight primarily because of alcohol. And, this person knew that their biggest problem was that they drank a bottle of wine each night type thing. But the reason that she drank a bottle of wine each night was because her husband had died. And what am I supposed to tell her with that? Like, I was like, oh, fuck. I don't know what that feels like. That sounds awful. I'm pretty confident that's awful. She knows that the wine is the main thing that's doing it, but she's using it to numb some pretty serious pain. And who the fuck am I to judge that thing? So we didn't address her drinking whatsoever. And we just went, well, she's joined the gym. She wasn't previously going to the gym, and now she's seeing me twice a week and coming in. Maybe that's enough progress for now.
Massively.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's the reflection on the changes that you have made, rather than always looking at the next thing. It's quite often,
here's what you're not doing. Here's what you're not doing.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the next step. And you could do this, and we can add this, and we can add this. And
That wine can go.
That wine can go. But then just
let's bring the pain back.
Fuck the wine off for starters.
But then just with certain clients, especially when they think they're not getting, when they don't think they're progressing, and actually just look back and go, actually, you've never been to the gym before. I have a client I talk about a lot who James knows well. I'm so shit at this fucking mic thing.
You're doing okay.
I mean, the breathing into it, you can hear my water bottle going down, or I'm speaking the wrong way.
Daniel mouth breather. Fucking hell, Dan.
And I've got a client, and one of the things we've done, he's never consistently trained before in his life. And he is now consistently training. And does he want to lose some weight? Yes, he does. Now, there's some things he wants to overcome. Yes, he does. And sometimes he's hard on himself for that. And there's a time when I say, these are the changes we could make. But a lot of the time, it's like, you've trained more consistently for a longer period of time than you ever have before. And actually, let's reflect on how well you've done to do that for this stage. And at a certain stage when we want to move that on, we can move that on. But it's so easy, isn't it, to constantly look at the next thing and the next thing and the next progression. And sometimes it's nice just to maintain and understand the progress you've made. And when the time's right, you can move it forward again.
Well, sometimes, you know, it's the least sexy goal of all time. We said it earlier. Dying slowly is itself a goal, in the sense that most people, when they feel like they're not moving forwards, assume that they would be not moving forwards at the same speed if they weren't training. Yeah. And they weren't with you. Yeah. They think they'd stay in the same boat. And I'll tell you, no, you fucking won't. Yeah. You'll go backwards, because we've done this enough time that when clients do that, they go backwards most of the time if that's how they're kind of feeling.
Can leave me if you want, mate, but you're going to go fucking downhill, mate, all right? It's your call, mate.
I'm the only one keeping you together.
You're done 10 years early, because you're fucked if you leave me.
That's the marketing campaign. You're fucked
there
if
you
you
go.
leave.
Paul summed up the tension for us now, hasn't he?
Best strategy, boys.
That's
Just
the best strategy.
threaten them with illness if they ever leave. I've had clients.
Are you sure you want to stop, mate? Are you fucking sure?
Are you sure? They all got cancer. All the ones who've left me. Life expectancy 6 months after they leave. But yeah, most people go backwards. And actually, the ability... COVID is a great example of this. If you, when the gyms were closed, managed to not go backwards with your physique, when you got to the end of COVID, you were ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
Because most people went backwards. And so staying where you were was itself a form of progress when the river was running against you type thing. And when clients have lots going on in their life, sometimes it feels like they're trying really hard and getting almost nowhere. But you still have to try and frame it for them. If it's true, don't just blow smoke up their ass, right? Where, yeah, but look what everyone else has done. Or historically, when this has happened to you, you've stuffed your face.
Yeah.
You've done this, you've done that. And actually this time, yeah, you're not as pleased as maybe you'd like to be. And maybe I'm okay with that at times, because it tells me you're still aspirational, you still have these goals, and that's cool. Like, I don't think we should always be telling people, oh, do you know what? You should always be lovely to yourself for every little thing you've ever done. But do you know what? In the context of everything else, in the historical context of you, this is the best way you've handled this. That's awesome. And, you know, when this stuff starts to die down maybe a little bit, maybe we're then ready to kick on. I don't know about you guys, but I've had clients over the years who almost seem to go nowhere for a year, couple of years, and then suddenly, for who knows what reason, the penny drops and then, boom, they lose 4 stone in 6 months. Yeah. Like, I've had several clients where that's been the case, where they didn't go anywhere for ages type thing. They were healthier, they were better for doing that, but they almost needed to stay in the game long enough to have that epiphany moment. Yeah. And you never fully, I don't think, know when the epiphany moment comes, because every coach knows what it's like for the client to say, yeah, I really want to do this. And you can basically never predict which ones of those people are going to follow through on that and get what they said at the start. And some of the people that you go, bet they fucking don't, end up being amazing. And some of the people who promised you the earth go nowhere. And if you've been doing it a few years, you probably get to the point where you're like, I'm just going to wait and see and find out, because you can't really predict it.
Yeah.
It's in value and consistency, isn't it? Just keep going, and hopefully there will be a hook, or lifestyle might work out a bit better. Some people are a little less stressed, but not giving up on them. I'm here to support them and guide them. I want to help them change, but right now, maybe now isn't the right time, just by keeping in the gym, keeping going. But it's hard, isn't it, to get that balance between compassion on one side and then also a little bit of a kick and a little bit of challenge with ourselves as much as with our clients. It's a tough thing to kind of reconcile sometimes, I find, Paul.
Yeah, it 100% is. And part of the reason is you have a personality type. And so some people lean a bit more towards the disciplinarian and some people lean a bit more towards the compassionate, let's put flowers on and do whatever that thing kind of is. And so you have a disposition towards something and you should be aware of your disposition, because the only way you can start to challenge some of those bits in yourself and better serve the wide array of people who will come to you is by being aware of what your biases are and what your things are. But also your clients are all different. So some of your clients want you to give them a kick in the dick, right? And will complain if you if you're too nice to them. They actually will. And I think that's missed sometimes by some people. And then other clients think they need that and don't. And then other clients think they need to have their hand held and actually need to kick up the arse. And there's this wide array. And I suppose we come back to the thing we said earlier of it being almost a pragmatic thing that dictates whether it was right. If it worked for the client and they move forward in a way that they're pleased with, then it was right, whatever that approach was. And no one has 100% batting rate with this thing. Hopefully it improves over time as you become more aware of these things, as you apply the skills you're hearing James talk about and all that type of stuff. But, it's difficult because you change, you have a bias, your clients change, your clients have a bias. Like, it's a difficult field to navigate. In some sense, biomechanics is easier.
Yeah. Biomechanics is more kind of consistent, I suppose, isn't it? With people, you said they're always changing, we're always changing. So, like the word I mentioned earlier is reflection. Just be honest, go, look, actually, you know what? Maybe I do need to step up a little with that client. He needs a bit of a kick. He's in a good place. I had a client this morning and actually she's been struggling to change for a while. But today she came in a really good positive mindset. I haven't seen her like that. And we had a pretty tough session. Yeah. She hasn't had a session like that for a little while. And she said, really enjoyed that. And I just knew this was the right moment for her to push her. But the last month, she's not been in that place. So it's really understanding that person in front of you and go, right, how do I need to adapt my coaching now to the individual, but as you say, Paul, where the individual's at, which is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and I mean, half of it is just fucking ask your client.
Yeah. And pay attention.
Yeah. And listen. Yeah, actually listen. Yeah.
Like, okay, you can literally ask them sometimes, like, how do you like to feel at the end of a session? Okay, cool. Let's go and give them that particular thing. Would you like me to be a bit firmer with you? Do you think, how well listened to you do you feel?
Sounds like a first date, mate.
Yeah, you did get there.
Did I get that?
Yeah,
Sounds
you did.
right.
You
know what I'm
it
getting
took a while.
I was like, that's it.
That's what I sound a first date.
Yeah. I'm phrasing this.
Let's put this out there. How do you want to leave here feeling? I know it's a weird question. Just bear with me.
Just send out a
Paul's
question.
told me it works well.
Yeah. Just fill
do you want to be firmer with you or not?
Feedback, it's an important part of everything.
I know, that's where I've gone wrong, Paul. That's what I'm doing on my next date.
It comes with a type form and a Google Drive.
Feedback form afterwards.
I fucked this one right up.
That was my sexual performance. 1 to 5.
Yeah,
too delicate? Too firm?
Yeah.
Just about right?
5 out of 5, mate.
I am... 5 was the low score.
Yeah, 5 was the low score. Just to bring the conversation back to personal training for a minute. I accidentally once gave a client a kick up the arse, which hadn't what I meant to do.
Like a physical one?
Yeah.
Just
Is
kicked her down
Metaphorically, or you kicked them?
A bit of both. Well, she came in and it was the end of back in the day when I do like 10 sessions a day.
Yeah.
And it was like
you don't miss those days.
Like 10 past 8 in the evening. She was probably my 5th session in a row, and she came in and she hadn't lost weight again, and that was her goal. And she said she could just see the disappointment / anger on my face, which I had not meant to do at all. I was just tired or whatever it comes in. But weirdly, she said that actually gave her the kick up the arse she needed. Yeah. And then for the next 8 weeks, she consistently lost weight and got to where she wanted to go.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was completely accidental, but it just shows sometimes what the person needed in the moment wasn't what I meant to deliver. Now I'm more reflective and I'm more deliberate. And I respond to how the person came in, but that's what she did need. I was trying to be too compassionate.
Yeah, and that's that. There's a Carl Rogers idea of being, positive regard comes out quite a lot, but also, being honest about how you actually feel as the coach is an important thing that I think was what happened there.
Yeah, completely.
Is that sometimes because we think, I need to be compassionate, I need to be this, that, and the other, that we then pretend to be thinking and feeling things that we're not, and most of the time people can pick up on that, or it doesn't feel particularly genuine. And so I'm not saying you should be frustrated with your clients all the time, and that approach would probably not work for more clients than it would work for. But it clearly worked for that client in that time, and we shouldn't pretend that it doesn't work for some people, and that wasn't what she needed.
And actually then that we could have a conversation about why she thought that worked, and she did want that slightly harder approach to it and hold her to account for the things that she said. And when she gave you a narrative or an excuse, challenge her. Don't because we can all come up with a narrative or an excuse as to why we haven't done something, and sometimes that just needs challenging, and she needed challenging. So the relationship slightly changed for the better, and she got the result she wanted.
That's Dan
because I was
physically
fucking
kicked her.
fuming at the end of the day.
Hoofed her down the road.
You got a kick. Wait till next time, love, right?
The threat of physical violence is very persuasive.
It's very persuasive.
I'll get the gloves on next time.
Done. Yeah, come on, you got boxing gloves on.
Have you guys ever heard of? I got this from Dan John years ago. I've never found anyone who had the balls to do it, but it's a wonderful idea called the blackmail diet.
The blackmail diet.
No. So this guy, it's in Dan John's book, Never Let Go, and he's telling a story about this psychology professor who apparently used to really struggle with his weight year on year. 100 odd pounds overweight, couldn't seem to get rid of it. And this guy was like, this is a bit fucking shit, really. I'm a psychology professor. I can't seem to make myself stick to something. That's a bit embarrassing, right? So he was like, okay, what do I know about human behavior, and how do I put a system in place to as close to guarantee me achieving this thing as it would be? So this is what he came up with, and it's an ingenious idea, but I've never had the balls to do it myself, and I've not met anyone else either, but it worked. So his idea was like, all right, this needs to cost me something if I was to fail. There needs to be a hell at the end of this thing if I don't achieve it. So he drew up a document with his lawyer that was like, right, if I don't lose £100 in a year, I'm going to give away all of my life savings, and I'm not going to give them away to British Heart, I think it was American, but American Heart Foundation or anything kind of else. I'm going to give it away to something that horrifies me. So in the contract was written up, I'm going to give it away to the neo-Nazi party of the thing. So he had this drawn up, which is mental, and sure enough, proceeded to lose £100 across the course of the year. Apparently he then amended it and was like, do you know what, it's not enough to have just lost it, I need to keep it off. So amended it for another year. If I don't still have this weight off in another year's time, then it also goes to insert horrible group that he didn't want to give 100 grand to, or kind of whatever it happened to be. And, that's not built on that leverage is really what I would call it. It's an emotional leverage and a financial leverage and kind of every other type of leverage over himself. It's not built on love. That's not built on positive shit. He's using fear and the desire to really not see something horrible happen as his motivator for that. And it worked. Now, I don't know how useful that is for the vast majority of clients. I don't know how you fully flesh that thing out. But sometimes that slight disappointment, that frustration, that avoiding something can be a form of motivation that I think there's a tendency at the moment to want to almost shy away from, and to think that all motivation needs to be driven by love. And I've never fully bought that. There's a guy called G.K. Chesterton, writing in like the 1920s or something. And he said something that I was like, that's what it is. And he said, he was talking about sort of faith and war, because we're just after the First World War type thing. And he said, can a man hate something enough, and he's talking about himself in this, to want to change, but love himself enough to think him worth changing? And I think that dichotomy of, I don't like this, and I therefore want to change it, but I'm also valuable enough that I deserve this positive change. I think that's, I suspect, the right balance of those two things. I think the negative stuff can be a useful, certainly short-term fuel. I think for most people, it's hard to live on that rocket fuel of negative shit without it spilling out into other stuff most of the time. Although even then, you can still find some outliers who seem to be driven by proving people wrong and doing all that stuff, like a Michael Jordan, like a JP, if you've ever listened to JP talk about stuff in fitness. So I think we're back to people are complex, right?
Yeah, I mean, you allude to self-worth there. If people don't feel like they're worth putting the effort in for, the worth changing, do they ever see long-term change? And hopefully, throughout the coaching, I've seen people's self-worth actually increase. Another thing there with behaviour change is people changing through fear.
Yeah.
And going, fuck. And sometimes I do get clients to think a little bit about what's going to happen if you don't change. If things stay the same now, what's your life going to look like in 10 years' time? And that is me trying to basically provoke or invoke some sort of concern.
Yeah.
You could use the word fear if you want to go quite extreme with it. And it makes people think and go, fuck me, if I don't change this situation right now, how's my health going to look like in 10 years' time? It makes people think, and it's a good strategy to open up conversation with think about behaviour change.
Yeah, I think it's carrot and stick, right? Like it's, okay, have you fleshed out what hell is? Have you fleshed out a bit more what heaven is? What's your best case scenario here? What's the worst if you kind of don't get to that? And different clients will respond to differing amounts of that. Possibly because they already have different biases. Some people live in daydream land and they could do with fleshing out the negatives a bit more. Lots, and I'd probably say more people do the other, right, where they live in the negative and haven't fleshed out some more of the positive stuff kind of within there. But you'll find people run the gamut really on that. And again, if it's working, then it's right. And you're not going to know that ahead of time. So you're just constantly trying. If someone is struggling to change, you're trying stuff and you're trying to create a space where they feel okay being honest with it and going, do you know that didn't fucking work, right? And then trying to assess, well, why didn't it work? And what do we think that was? Do we need to completely overhaul the approach, or do we just need to try it again? Like sometimes, like if a client fails a strategy in 1 week, that doesn't mean you completely have to abandon the strategy. They can try it again before you abandon it. There's a certain point at which you're running into the same wall over and over again, and then you do need to appraise things. But, no one nails something perfectly. Almost no one nails something perfectly the first time they do it. So don't be afraid to allow people. And again, ask them, would you want to try it again? Do you think there's something kind of within that? Or do we need to change the approach kind of fundamentally or a little bit within there? But we come back, I think, to almost everything with, have you planned out what you wanted to do? Go away and execute it for a period of time and then assess it. Plan, execute, assess. Plan, and then from the assessment, replan, re-execute, reassess, replan. And, by that method, you slowly approximate success.
The assess and reflection is such an important one that came in later in my career, because I have to say in the early days I didn't reflect. It either did work or it didn't work, and then we ploughed on as it was anyway. And actually, it doesn't work for you, but it'll work for someone else, and there'll be another 10 people and I'll get my 1 out of 10 hit rate, and that'll be the one I'll use for my marketing
100%,
thing.
yeah.
But it's so important, isn't it, that ability to be able to assess and reflect with the client, but also not just change because it hasn't worked for a short period of time. James, you mentioned on the podcast a few weeks ago, I think you used it as an analogy for a client. They were in business, and funny enough, it was about marketing. You wouldn't just use a marketing strategy. Thank you. A marketing strategy for 1 week, and then if you didn't get enough sales, be fuck all, no sales. I'm not going to do it. You're going to have a period of time where you let that run, and then you can properly assess and reflect and make the subsequent changes. And I think sometimes the things I've had to do with clients is slow them down and maybe be like, look, the results haven't come out this week, but you're feeling pretty good doing it. Maybe there's a tweak we can make, but let's just let it run, which is what you were saying a minute ago. But sometimes it's being comfortable enough to not react too quickly when a client doesn't feel they're getting maybe instantaneous, or some general population of clients like, I haven't lost 5 kilos this week, it's all been a failure. And it's like, well, actually this 0.5 kilos, fine, let's run with this and let's see where it goes. But you're the voice of reason, the objectivity in the room to be able to say, look, let's stick with this and let's see where we go.
Yeah, I suppose you're back at, unrealistic expectations versus realistic. Well, how do you know? Clients don't know what an unrealistic expectation is, because if they did, they, in some sense, might not be hiring you. Like, they're hiring you because they don't know a bunch of the shit that they think they should be doing, and they need some form of accountability and plan and help to get to this thing. And so loads of clients think they could lose 5 kilos in a week. Yeah. And we laugh because you're like, no, short of some surgery or you getting food poisoning for a temporary period of time, that's not happening. But they don't know that. So there's going to be a form of education going on within there. And we don't need to react. We don't need to change anything else. We might need a little bit of gentle education within that thing where, we meet them with it. We laugh about, this is a common kind of thing, etc. But, it'd be a bit like changing approach all the time. It would be like changing approach just because the scale fluctuates. Yeah. Like life fluctuates. And there's no clear, I don't think, dividing line about, this is definitely when you now change. At the extremes, okay, if a person hasn't changed for a year and they've gone nowhere and nothing seems to be working, well, all right, change the approach or try changing it. But, so that's obvious. And then so is the, my weight went up after I drank this tea. I should probably lower my calories now. You're like, well, no, that's ridiculous too. So the extremes become obviously stupid, but the middle bit of like, when is the right time? When have you given it enough time to test it versus change it? It's like, well, that's a bit of a judgment call. There's no hard and fast right or wrong answer with that. And annoyingly, because I'm assuming keep saying the same thing, you're going to need to talk to your client.
You're going to talk to them again, for fuck's sake, mate.
Have you ever, one of the mistakes that I reflect on fairly recently in the last couple of years was allowing a client to sort of run away with unrealistic expectations
Yeah.
without me bringing them back.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when I didn't bring them back because I wanted the consultation to be all positive and things, when they didn't achieve these unrealistic expectations, they ended up dropping off. And it was something I really reflected on, because I didn't set that at the start and say, look, I know this is what you want to achieve, but we also need to be realistic. And this is where my experience as a coach needs to come in and be like, actually, we're probably setting the bar too high. We're setting up ourselves for potential failure. Maybe we need to have a conversation about what's realistic. And because I didn't have that conversation, I sort of let it snowball.
Yeah.
And that cost me the client.
Yeah.
Because I didn't do that part of my job.
Well, I think that's what you're doing is signposting, right? You're kind of going, and I found this useful when people come. There's a tendency, I think, as younger trainers to want to change all the opinions your client has about stuff you don't agree with in the first session.
In the first minute.
Yeah, exactly.
You're wrong there, mate. No, you're fucking wrong again.
Yeah.
But
I'm gonna give you some
Right, let me
facts.
fucking tell you now, mate. All right, full of shit. All right, Betty down the road, mate. She ain't got a fucking clue. All right.
Yeah, and that's
Your mum, she's been chatting shit for the last 2 decades. All right.
It's true,
And your
though.
dad, don't get me started on him.
but we laugh because we all go,
'Cause
yeah,
it's true.
Did all those, yeah. And so sometimes if someone's got this hard felt conviction about a dietary approach or whatever it happens to be, they're like, yeah, I really want to do keto, and you're like, I think that's a dumb idea. Let's maybe not do that. But they're committed. What I would usually do with that kind of person is, all right, well, let's go and find out, because by the way, keto does work for people sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So, you can't pretend that it doesn't, even though I'm skeptical for the vast majority of clients and think there's better ways. If this person is really committed, in spite of my bias, I'll go, all right, so let's go and do that. Here's what we'll need to do if we're going to do it effectively. Here's where it usually goes wrong for people, and they're going to struggle to stick to it, and you're going to, and you might find yourself again down the bakery aisle of fucking Tesco again, right? And all those bits and pieces. So I'm just signposting that if it goes wrong, here's where it usually goes wrong. And so that client, when they get down that road, if they experience it, they go, Paul was right. And then I've built some trust, because now they go, do you know what? He does know what he's on about. He did roughly successfully predict what I would start to experience and what went on with that thing. And the more you do that, the more you're seen as a bit of an expert in the eyes of that person, and the more likely they are to listen to you with other ideas. But that wouldn't happen if you immediately just dismissed everything and didn't let them go and find out. So I think we come back to the advisory role again of going like, look, if you do this approach, here's where it can go wrong. Here's what we need to do in order to do it reasonably successfully. Still want to do it? Cool. Let's go and give it a crack. We'll feedback and just see how you're going. And, how long do you think we need to run it for before we make a decision either way? Because it probably shouldn't just be 3 days, right? But it might not need to be 3 months before we do that particular thing. So have that conversation with them. And that allowing clients to learn themselves through experience, not just because you've stated some shit to them, is an underappreciated part of coaching, I think, just in general. Whether you're teaching someone biomechanics or you're encouraging behavior change, people need to experience stuff. They're not persuaded by just words.
So what you talk about a lot, James, isn't it? It's the idea that for someone to truly change their opinion on something, a belief, it normally comes through experience, which you mentioned a lot of times. And so allowing someone, as you say, to go through that experience can be more beneficial than just telling them they're wrong. I've made that mistake on consultations as well, where I've literally just annihilated every single belief they've ever had about
I did
anything.
it with Dan's consultation. I was
Yeah,
Dan, you're fucking,
all
you're
my
just
beliefs
wrong,
just
mate.
absolute bullshit. How the fuck are you still coaching? How the fuck are you
I'll
coaching
stop you
in the
there,
first
mate.
place?
All right, you're chatting shit.
Dan, what in the fuck are you saying?
It's just an hour of loom of just fucking swear words and pointing at the fucking camera.
But you know what? It worked. He
It
signed
worked.
up. So
He signed up and he's still going.
I
so,
kicked
like,
him at the end of it,
Kicked
just
the
down
shit.
the road.
But it's a good point on experiences, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's so important to let clients experience, good things, bad things, and then allow them to kind of learn and navigate from those experiences, which is something I spoke about before, but it's an
Because
important
they
point.
do come back to you then and say, yeah, I experienced this,
Yeah.
and that's going to change their thought process and to what I think, which was right in the fucking first place. So can we all agree I'm right here?
So
yeah,
go on.
great, let's move on.
Oh, look at
Fucking
is
hell, why
that-
did that take 5 minutes?
That's my favourite words when a client says to you, you're right. I'm like, I always say, in these 4 walls, I'm right, yeah.
Fucking
Get me out
right.
of this environment. I'm often
Still
wrong.
fucking right.
I just like to wear a T-shirt that says "I told you
right,
so."
yeah.
That I like to feel like a goal celebration.
Yeah.
Just a tattoo. Just like get topless.
But I suppose through experiences as a coach, like we mentioned the word wisdom sometimes, Dan, don't we? And I think what we're talking about is time as a coach doesn't necessarily gather wisdom, but if you're able to reflect and look deeply, pay attention, give a shit, work hard, all those things, you gather a lot of wisdom. And you can gather quite a bit of wisdom, not necessarily in don't necessarily, I mean, don't get me wrong, having more time is great, but you can gather quite a lot if you really pay attention to your client's struggles and try and develop some of these skills, early on, which I didn't do it in my career. I just cracked in straight out of the army. You can imagine what I was like. Fuck me, mate. People were puking up left, right, and centre. It wasn't pretty.
But it was wise puking. So
it was, yeah. It was all well thought out. I tell people to suck it up and just get a fucking grip of yourself, people. So, yeah, it was funny times. But, yeah, those wisdom is kind of so important, isn't it, really? And as we get older, hopefully we get wiser. But through kind of acknowledging that we're not perfect and going, look, I'm just trying to get better, pay attention, give a shit, as I said, you develop that wisdom and hopefully we get a bit better.
Well, there's a type of therapy called dialectical-based therapy, or DBT, that has a concept called wise mind, and I think it's a really nice one. And wise mind, if you're listening to it, is like, okay, you can argue with this compartmentalization, but it works for the purpose of what it's there for, and it's often used for people who struggle to emotionally regulate, whether that's bipolar type things or whatever. So you've got a rational mind and an emotional mind as far as it is concerned. And if you're just trying, lots of people when they do their planning do rational mind planning, right? Robot me is going to execute this fantastic plan that I've just come up with kind of here that has no regard for whether I'm tired, whether I'm pissed off with this, that, and the other, etc., etc. But you need some rational mind, right? If you haven't got any rationality in your planning's probably going to be pretty flaky. Right, so that's rational mind, and then the emotional mind is all the kind of other stuff. It's the recognition that you're, a bag of flesh with a bunch of feelings and electrical, chemical stuff going kind of on, and you often act irrationally if you are basing it just on this rational thing. And if you're constantly reacting or just making your decision based on just how you're feeling, you're going to be a flip-flop, right? And you can be up, down, left, right, all over the shop, getting annoyed, fucking up your relationships. This is generally the way people behave when they've got addiction-type stuff. So we'll see cocaine-like behaviors. We see people spending all of their life savings. You see, it's not great to just react to every emotion that you have and base on it. Wise mind is about the synthesis of the two, the dialectic. A dialectic is just a conversation between two opposing positions. So when you're planning and coming up with stuff, if these are things you struggle with, it can be a really useful technique to look at your planning through both the rational perspective and the emotional perspective. And does your plan synthesize the two together and kind of go forward from that? But I think the idea of wisdom is underappreciated in so much.
It's that kind of communication between the two parts of the mind, isn't it? And at the moment, I'm studying quite a lot of sort of psychodynamic therapy and doing a course at the moment. Starting with a bit of Freud, yeah. But one part of, again, going back to speaking, I suppose, is just to let your emotional brain air a little bit, what's going on emotionally, understand your emotions, and then just try and get it to communicate a little bit better with the logic. And when clients are stood there in front of me, I'm saying, look, this is us having generally, not all the time, an adult conversation. Not always. Sometimes you might get the child and the parent, and we could go down the whole kind of transactional analysis road that I'll pull myself out of. But essentially it's going, look, right now in this current state, we're both reasonably calm. I get it. Logical brain saying this, but what happens when you're in the emotional state? As you're saying there, Paul, what behaviours do we have? How emotionally intelligent are we? How do we develop better emotional awareness? How do we react in more of a helpful way to some fucking really powerful drivers, which are your emotions? They don't give a shit about what's right logically for you. They just care about gratification and survival. And that won't always lead to the best decisions. And that's just why sort of integrating a little bit of understanding around emotions is something I'm quite passionate about, because we're emotional beings, we're emotional creatures, and not to acknowledge that is missing a big part of what it is to be human.
No, 100%. It's fundamental. Like even the word emotion, right? There's an old Greek word, mot, which just means to move, right? The point of emotions is they are there to move you. You're an emotional creature before you're a rational creature. Those things act way faster than you can consciously think about stuff. And thank God for that, because you can't appraise a tiger quickly enough, right? You need to just get out of dodge. And, these drivers, they're complicated. And the annoying part of emotions are related to values, right? Like, you've got the obvious kind of stuff of a physical sensation. And you could probably think, I think, about positive and negative emotions broadly and think, well, the positive ones are there to reinforce something, to get you to repeat a particular pattern or behavior or choice, because it's beneficial for you in some way according to some value. And then the negative stuff is threat avoidant or moving you away, or you need to actually go and do this particular thing. So you could think the obvious sensation stuff like hunger and thirst and sleep. Like, the reason that it feels so good to like lay down if you've been standing and walking all day is because you have a need for some rest and this type of thing. And if you're just laying on the couch all day, all right, it's fine. But if you've been on your feet for 14 hours and then you lay on the couch, woo, best feeling under the sun. And the same thing is true with food. Nothing tastes better than when you're super, super lean. And the reason for that is you're miles away from your need for food and you're starving. And so your body is going to reward you when you move toward the value of not fucking starving to death. And so it feels great because then you'll want to do it more, which is why, high carb, high fat, a little bit of salt foods taste delicious to us because they're great for survival. Better that you find them delicious than that you find celery delicious, because no one should find celery delicious, right? So you've got the basic needs, but then you've got more complex stuff in the emotional shit, I think. Like, is it good to be alone? That one is harder to answer because we have different words for it, right? You have, if you're alone and want to be alone, we have solitude. It's blissful. It's nice. Just a bit of time with me. But if you're alone and don't want to be alone, we just call it loneliness. It's fucking shit. Well, the thing is the same, but the way you're interacting with it is quite different. And then you've got even more complicated shit, like human beings are motivated by the concept of a nation, right? And the concept of truth and various other things. And we're clearly motivated by it because we'll go to war for these things sometimes. And it's hard to say someone isn't motivated by something they're willing to die for or to give their family for. So clearly we're motivated by these things. And the hard part is that you have all of these things bubbling inside you all the time, and they don't all agree with each other. So sometimes to move towards the satisfaction of one, like hunger, might be to move away from another, like using alcohol as a pain numbing agent, or, being able to go and socialize. Like, how many clients don't have social shit they can go and do that isn't just about food and drink? And so when they start dieting, now they're missing their social needs because they haven't replaced it with anything else. And the only fun, nice, delicious thing in their life was food. And so you've removed a bunch of the pleasure from their life. And, well, now they've just got to sit with that until they achieve this goal, apparently. And so having this, a little bit of an understanding of the complexities of humans and all these things that are kind of going on. And we also have like a negativity bias. So, it could be nice to move towards the being leaner thing, but painful to move away from spending time with friends and family and enjoying food. But you don't feel the positive and negative to the same degree. Generally speaking, you experience the negative to a greater degree than you experience the positive within stuff. And so it just fucking complicated and hard for people. And, you just have to kind of know some of that stuff going in when you're dealing with people.
I think it helps. I think sometimes the more you learn, the more overwhelming it can feel at times as well. But we have these, you said values there. We have these kind of, do I fulfill the short-term value or the long-term value?
Yep.
And life is about fucking trade-offs, essentially. Yep. And the short-term value might be, I want to go out and get smashed with the boys and do that. Okay, nothing wrong with that. That depends on what's going on in your life and your values. But is the trade-off a long-term value? Something else that's really meaningful? Something else that would bring a lot of fulfillment and joy to your life? Might be, for some people listening, more of that long-term value. And it's just kind of realising that and working out that ambivalence in your own mind, or helping your clients find or highlight or become aware of that natural ambivalence that we all have.
Yep. Short-term
value over long-term value. And we've all got this mindset of, do I give my emotions what they need now, or do I have that long-term thing? Fucking hell. And it's a really difficult thing for clients. I definitely agree with you, Paul. Understanding this stuff is really helpful as a coach.
Yeah, well, it's, there's no simple fix to it, because, we can hear that. And I think most people hear, short-term versus long-term. Well, you should never sacrifice the short-term for the long-term. That's not true. If you're dying tomorrow, get sacrificing, bitch, right? Like, spend all you can. You're dead tomorrow. Like, and you don't know that you're living to tomorrow. I don't know that when we finish this podcast, I'm not going to get smashed by a truck outside in Shoreditch somewhere.
Start off too many beers, mate, and we'll survive it.
But, we've got that bit of going, yes, I think as a general idea, you probably don't want to sacrifice the long term for the short term too much. But the sentence too much is vague. Like, what is too much, really? It doesn't. That's like telling people to eat more protein. How much more, and exactly what do you mean in order to do that? Like, they're those kind of things, I think, that sometimes we have conversations about that sound wise, and we all nod and we go, yes, that is correct. Like, if someone says you need balance in your life, everyone goes, yes.
It's true.
But, like, there's no specificity in that. What the fuck does that mean? And also, who's for the opposite? Like, not many people are advocating a complete lack of balance in their life. No, do you know what? I'm not about balance. Fuck balance.
You need balance? Oh, cheers, mate. Cheers, point out of yours, mate.
And clients pay you for specifics. When we get, even when you're doing therapy or anything like that, okay, big abstract ideas can be useful in understanding a general thing of what might be going on, but it's the specifics that we relate to. The same is true in story. I think if you're trying to talk to people about mental health, lots of people talk about mental health and they talk about mental health, and it's so broad as to be almost meaningless. No, it doesn't connect to someone, so that if you're listening to this, you're kind of going, is that me? Does that describe what it's like to be, unable to escape from my head at any particular kind of moment, or to know what it's like during PT sessions to go and like cry in the disabled toilet when pretending you're going for a pee for the 7th time in the last 3 hours, but that's just because putting the face on and pretending that you're not breaking down every moment is exhausting. No, it's the specifics that people will relate to. And that's also true in coaching. Okay, we can have the principle of more protein, but that's not what a client's going to pay you for. They're going to be like, right, here's how we're going to do it. Here's the actual plan for the execution of the concept of more protein within that. We're going to have that for breakfast, or you can find something. What I need in this meal is 40 grams, right? Here's some examples of 40 grams. I need you to just look at some fucking labels, right? That's the specifics of someone being able to action it rather than just have the overview of more protein, or we're trying to be balanced. Okay. How? In what way? How are you helping someone be more balanced? Is that their version of balance? Is that balance the same throughout their entire life? I doubt it, right? What feels like a balanced state right now is only a balanced state right now, and it might look quite different in another couple of years. But you're only going to get there. This is a rant now, apparently. You're only going to get there.
Keep going. It's a good
one. Dan loves a rant.
I love a rant.
Love a rant.
Love a rant.
But you're only going to get there by having... God, we're fucking sounding like a gong just going over and over. By communicating, right, with a person.
But it's amazing how often you come back to it, right?
But it comes back so often, doesn't it, to just get better communication. Hence why we talk a lot about it on the plug for the seminar. But
I am going to move it on a little bit.
Go on, mate. I know you want to. You're fucking desperate. I know. He's just going to go. He's going to go biomechanics. We've got to go
fucking mechanics.
Just warming up with Paul there, mate. We're just getting a bit deep.
We've done an hour on.
We've done an hour doing communication.
Right, James, you can fuck off now, mate.
Now we're going fucking mechanics.
Shut it off your voice, mate.
Well, the reason is obviously it's what you teach, it's what you sell, it's what you become. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's what you've become known for. Because in terms of your reach, and I think when I first became aware of you was on RTS with Michael. We're doing the online course over COVID. And you've got a lot more followers since then.
Yeah.
Was that from the biomechanics? Talking of rants, I know your rants were very popular and very entertaining as well.
Thanks, buddy.
And they speak so well to the bias of a lot of personal trainers as well, because it's what a lot of trainers want to say. I suppose there's going to be a couple of parts to this, because the first bit's biomechanics, but the second bit is that growth in terms of your presence. Has that come from the biomechanics side or Instagram? What sort of led to your growth?
Yeah, that's fair. Probably. So my Instagram has been weird over the years. So I dated someone years ago now, about 5 years ago, who had like 150,000 follower type thing. And she was an influencer in Ireland.
Did you know this before you started dating her, Paul?
No.
You got how many followers? Cool. Do you want to go on a date?
Yeah, met on Tinder first.
Yeah.
And then,
it's on me.
I was like, good, right. So went from like, I don't know, 900 followers to 7,000 in a day or something when she kind of announced the relationship. And then that kind of grew gradually. And then when we broke up, the day after we broke up, it went from 8,000 to like 13,000 in a day. People get nosy. Right?
Yeah, okay.
So it was about 13,000. And then when these people who were following me realized he doesn't talk about anything related to relationships and what was going on in those bits, and I knew so little really. Like with hindsight, I could have really leveraged that audience and made a business out of it. There was enough things there that if I'd have understood how to make a product, how to serve an audience, how to make content for an audience, and really like my following at that point, I think it was 96% female, and yet my content was wanting to talk about nerdy fucking physiology and bits and pieces that was just 5-6 likes. How have you got 13,000 followers and you're getting that? It was pathetic. And then it gradually shrank because I wasn't following anything. So it went from 13,000 to like 7,000 over a few years. I just got used to seeing it go down. At a certain point, you're like, all right. And then, really, once I got into the biomechanics space a little bit more, so it's before joining the Muscle Mentors and stuff, it started to kind of turn around. Now, I think there's probably a few things in that. There was definitely talking about this thing that I'd become more passionate about was useful. I think the background in performing and acting stuff, I'd like to think I have an okay capacity to communicate stuff in a reasonably engaging manner. And I think that's often lacking in the biomechanics space. And I'd learned a bit more about how to communicate things in not quite so shit and dull a manner that no one is following along with. And so it from then really kind of started to gradually grow. And then joining the Muscle Mentors saw a little uptick in that, and then it kind of been pretty gradual and continual since then.
Because I've heard you talk about mechanics. It's one of the things, it resonates with me because I've been on the same journey where not really understanding exercise, just understanding what I think they should look like. And the people that can't do it, it's their fucking fault. And so as I then started to get into mechanics and understand things to a high level, it really opened my eyes. It was the thing I've been looking for. And over the years, I'd seen these trends of things that I did, but I was like, I don't really get how it fucking works, but it's the trend, so I'm going to do it, powerlifting or whatever.
For sure.
And then I'd realised, like, I had one client who for years I had barbell squat and deadlift, and after mechanics I realised for her they were exactly the same fucking movement, and she was doing
Just
like
all
100 on every
hips.
set. It was
Yeah.
all hips
Yeah,
and
yeah.
both. And let's come back, and afterwards it was like, you were actually just doing a hip dominant movement for the whole session. And now I can see that
Great ass,
it was,
buddy.
well, that's zero glutes, no,
exactly.
but massive glutes. And I know the example I've heard you use a lot, which is a great one, is the lateral raise. When people have said to you previously, why is it hard at the top and easy at the bottom? Because it just fucking is. Let's all move on. Yes, I'm still an expert. But for you, was it those epiphany moments with biomechanics that really resonated with you, that gave you that passion for it?
Yeah, so for me, I had been a trainer, I don't know, 8 years or something before I found biomechanics. And I've always been a nerd, so I always liked knowing stuff. So, I was following Brad Schoenfeld and Eric Helms and Alan Aragon, and before that there was Poliquin and Czech. And, I was constantly trying to go on courses and learn more and have the answers to these things. But I'd gotten to the point where I was almost a bit hilariously bored by training. I thought I knew everything.
I know what you mean.
Everyone had to bench, and you were going to follow the setting, and it was all that kind of stuff. So I didn't really have to think that much because it was always going to be the same answers.
Same answer to every question.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And so training was kind of boring me a little bit at that point. I was like, the psych stuff is more interesting. Maybe you get a little bit to the point with nutrition where you're like, you go down the rabbit hole of nutrition for a bit, and then you realize actually the bits that you need to apply are also quite, they're quite straightforward. They're not that complicated because you're actually looking at how do I get people to stick to stuff. Not, what's the nitrate content of beetroot? Like, that's not really a
Let's
thing.
talk about the Krebs cycle. Oh, fuck off.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter.
No one gives a shit about the Krebs cycle, mate.
So I'd become they really fucking
They really
do.
don't, yeah.
I don't actually often.
Yeah. So I'd become a bit bored, and then I'd found the Muscle Mentors the year before, and they were talking about this guy called Michael Goulden a little bit, and I'd sort of they posed some questions. I remember the banded RDL kind of discussion. I was like, what do you mean that doesn't do any more hip? The band is pulling on the hip. How could that didn't make any sense to me at this point. But I was curious, right? And I'm sure I tried out a couple of little exercises that I'd seen. I was like, I feel all right. And so then Integra came up, and Integra was like, oh wow, it's like 900 quid for a weekend. I was like, that's a pricey course. I was like, everyone keeps speaking really highly about it. Is it going to be all right? Well, fuck it. Let's give it a crack. Let's give it a go and see kind of what happens. And yeah, it blew my mind and opened, because the thing that you said, why is the lat raise? I remember Michael asking, why is the lat raise hardest at the top when your arm is out to the side than at the bottom? And I went, I don't know. Fuck, why don't I know? Because it self-evidently is to anyone who's ever done a lat raise. Yeah. But you're like, well, the dumbbell didn't get any heavier and gravity still exists. Why the fuck is this thing? And it really annoyed me that I didn't know the answer. And so I dislike not knowing the answers to things. And so that kind of natural curiosity started leading down a road. And I wanted to know more, and I wanted to know more. And this was the first thing in years that had excited me about training, that I felt like I had to engage my brain in. And I'm not someone who likes to just go through the motions all the time. You have some parts of every job that are going through motions, whether that's admin or whatever it kind of needs to be. Like, I think it's unrealistic and unreasonable to be super engaged in every fucking moment. Like, that's not going to happen. But I was bored before it. And then this thing opened, and I was like, oh, wow, I have to think, and I have to pay attention, and I have to explore, and I can't just come armed with all the answers ahead of time. And that led down that, and then I started going, okay, when you look at biomechanics stuff, I've said it at the start of this, I think, but biomechanics is just forces applied to anatomy. When I was looking at most of the biomechanics courses, most of it was more about the anatomy side, and then I started having some more of the forces questions in my head that I wanted answering. And I couldn't seem to find any courses that would give me those answers. So that led down the road of, okay, this is just physics. Okay, so I've got to learn some physics stuff. So you kind of go and you do some Khan Academy, you watch Walter Lewin lectures, and you sign up to courses, and you do a part of an A level for it, and all those kind of bits. I didn't need to do the nuclear physics part of that particular one because that doesn't really relate to the gym. But you go through the Newtonian mechanics, the mechanics of motion stuff, and you're like, okay, this is exciting. Except for the fact when you're starting to learn physics, you realize, oh, you need to learn maths, you need to learn algebra, and a fuckload of algebra. And I was like, well, I don't remember any algebra. It's like, I didn't remember any of that. So
I didn't know in the first place.
Yeah, I don't think I did.
I never learned it.
I didn't know it at school.
And then there was like trigonometry. I was like, Pythagoras. I don't remember. What fuck is soccer? But I really wanted to know the answers. I wanted to know why on that leg press at 45 degrees do you have 71% give or take of the load? Why at 30 degrees do you have 50% of the load? I'm hearing people say this, and that's great, but I want to know why. Don't just tell me that it is. I need that to make sense to me as to why it is. And so you just keep kind of going if you're curious about some of those bits and pieces.
In our industry, because it's interesting, because when we learn with Michael, and obviously you've learned with Tom, when you go with Tom, does Tom go into the physics as deep as you have? Because I don't know anyone from the biomechanics world that I'm aware of that has gone as deep into the actual really understanding the physics.
Yeah.
For instance, with me, I understand the trends. I know the 71% of the 45 degree, all this sort of stuff, but I don't know anyone that's gone into the physics as deep as you have. Was that you wanted the answer?
Yeah.
But that's also something that's going to give you something that no one else is really selling within our sector, within our industry.
Yeah, it was a little bit both of those things. Like when I joined the Muscle Mentors, one of the reasons I joined was I'd been teaching Luke, who used to run the Muscle Mentors, to the physics side of things because I wanted that. Tom, to be fair to Tom, Tom can talk to you in that language. He can talk about sines and cosines and bits and pieces and work, like the concept of work, force times distance in physics, and what that means for what we're doing. And he said, he certainly went down that route and paid some tutors and people to help him kind of figure these things out. And then once you've got the broad concepts down, you probably don't need too much beyond the concepts, because when you're studying these things, when you're studying the change in acceleration that people are doing, so people don't move at a constant speed when they do anything, even if you put a metronome on and they go, and they have to kind of do, 3 up, 3 down, whatever it happens to be. They still won't be moving at like a perfectly linear acceleration, the same speed of acceleration through the entire thing, which means the forces themselves are undulating up and down quite a bit. And so you're never going to get a perfect answer. Like, you can't mathematically calculate it ahead of time, other than the broad understanding of going, well, if I move it at this speed versus this speed, this is roughly what it's going to do to the force here and the force there. It's going to be way bigger as a result of this and way lower as a result of this. And that's the general concept. Or I've got this thing rotating. Okay, well, it turns out when I'm spinning around an axis, the load distance from the center of the axis matters more than the weight. So the radius matters more than the load itself. They're not an equal part of an equation. That's vaguely useful to know if you're thinking about the concept of speed of lifting and shit kind of like that. So it's super useful for me to go through those phases. And I kind of found that I enjoyed it anyway. One of the things I really enjoyed about the biomechanics and the forces side is you've got some black and white answers, and things like what we were discussing earlier with human behavior and psychology, there really aren't.
Yeah.
Like there's no great fucking black and white answer that you can go and be like, that is true. Undeniably, undoubtedly, repeatedly, every single time, that's what you get. That doesn't happen at all. And so you have to learn to live in the grey. But living in the grey is draining sometimes because there's always more doubt and there's always ooh. And so when I started doing this, I was like, oh no, that is what the answer is. Certainty, my old friend. Yeah. Right? Like that was a really nice feeling for me kind of within that. So that was a super useful phase. And I would still say it's useful for trainers to know some more of the physics side of things, but I wouldn't call it essential. Like if you're learning biomechanics and you're on the gym floor, you don't need to go and do the equations to function as a great trainer on the gym floor. You don't. But is it useful if you're that way inclined as a more solid underpinning so you feel confident in it? Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think biomechanics is, because I haven't done the level 3 obviously for a long time now, I've been trained as 12 years, but yeah. I think it's awful at preparing you for what you're actually going to face as a personal trainer.
Yep.
And that doesn't seem to have changed as I meet trainers coming through. Do you think, because again, this is my bias speaking, but we could add bias in terms of psychology and communication as well. Actually, if you were to redesign the level 3 and not have to stick to the thing as it is, biomechanics in terms of the simplistic way, like the foundations of RTS, being a part of that qualification, I think would be really powerful to help those trainers coming through and seeing what's really going on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think, the bits, learning how to align someone on a leg extension and how to sort of roughly manipulate a machine so that you change the forces at each point in the range relative to what the person in front of you can actually handle and deal with. And the concept that, okay, just because I've got 20 kilos on the machine doesn't mean I've got 20 kilos kicking them in the shin. Right, and that it's not going to stay the same load throughout the range, and it's going to vary based on how I perform it as well. And what can I do to that to create? Well, what's the sensation I'm trying to create? Well, either I'm trying to make someone's quads fucking on fire, or I'm trying to unload it a little bit because they've got a little bit of a niggly knee in certain positions, or whatever those things happen to be. If you can learn to create those experiences on the gym floor, if that was part of the level 3, that prepares you way more. Even if you don't know all the ins and outs and the whys and wherefores as to why it's happening, that sort of doesn't matter because it's that ability to create the client experience. Like the best sales technique, I'm convinced, for PTs in person, if you still work on the gym floor, is the ability to create client experiences when they're doing exercises that feel great for the client, that feel targeted on the muscle they want to target, and that don't cause them any joint issues. If you can create that experience for them, you will look like some kind of god to this person. You won't have to do that much selling. It's more a case at that point of, well, does the person have any money for it? And not all of them will, but even if they don't, they'll think, fuck me, they're the go-to guy. They're the go-to girl for this particular thing. And so they'll, oh man, I did this thing with Paul and like, he was fucking awesome at this, blah, blah, blah. And so even if they can't afford it, maybe someone else they tell. Because again, words are not, talking about physics is not persuasive to someone on the gym, right? It's just not. Creating something that they've gone, I've never felt that in my quad muscle and I've been training 8 years, is super persuasive. And I say that because that happened to me. I'd been training over a decade, and I remember the first time I did a leg extension with Michael at Integra and was like, what the fuck was that? And that alone, along with the lat raise, I don't know the answer to that. Those elements of curiosity and changing the experience were as persuasive to me as you could literally write essays that wouldn't have been as persuasive as those 2 moments.
Yeah, it also, I'd been a personal trainer, I think, for, must have been a similar sort of time, maybe 8 years before I found it. It improved my confidence.
God, yeah.
When setting programs, and it makes sense to me. I suddenly had this structure of building a program, of building exercises that made sense rather than just, I listened to a lot of Eric Helms when I was younger as well, and it's just like, because I'm not saying he's wrong in any way, just because he said that, it must be right. All of a sudden, I put a thing up the other day when we did our seminar last year. It was like, I could see it for myself. I can make the decision for myself, and I'm confident that I'm now making the right decision, giving the right exercise in the right way. And that was quite powerful for me in terms of the way I was delivering my sessions.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, Eric Helms is still, to this day, given one of the best seminars that I ever went to. He's really funny, great speaker, really smart guy. The problem is that the training research doesn't account for half of the biomechanical stuff that you'll learn if you ever go and do RTS or come to these things. And so it's just not as relevant as it sounds like it is when you start reading it. And it's certainly not relevant to when you've got 53-year-old Deirdre with one knee in front of you. It just doesn't matter. Like, well, am I going to go to back squat?
Yeah.
Like, probably not. She's not ready for those types of things. But she's paying me. But everyone has to back squat, or everyone has to do this. And the bar always has to touch the chest, or the arse always has to touch the grass, or whatever those things happen to be. And they're taken for granted and as a given, and they shouldn't be, to say nothing of all the rest of this stuff. And if you're coming into this world and you're sort of hearing these things, and you're like, but I'm coming from a science background, and that stuff all seems super persuasive, and it's got, it's peer reviewed, and I've got all these references in it, because this is where I came from, right? You'll be like, yeah, you sound like you're making stuff up at this point. You can't just be dismissing science that way. It's like, I'm not, but it's not taking into account all the physics that it needs to, and it shouldn't be dismissing physics, because the physics that this is built on is the same physics that launches rockets into space, that builds us bridges, that architects use to build skyscrapers. Like, this physics is more undeniable than any research paper you want to show me. And so if you can combine that foundational physics with the experience that you'll have when doing it, you're like, oh shit, maybe I've been wrong about all these things all this time. And I think It's really hard. I've yet to find a good way of saying that I find hugely persuasive. Like if I try and put myself in someone's shoes and they were coming into this world having never done any of it, and they'd come in liking science, so they'd followed Helms, they'd followed Israetel, they'd followed Schoenfeld, what could I say to them that would make them doubt enough what they think to start to go? And I've yet to find a good way. And one of the reasons being, just because I change the experience that you have doesn't mean that I'm saying this definitely grows something more. No, we have to be really cautious and careful with going, and this is what happens. But I'm also saying that that doesn't matter. Like, if someone comes in and they're trying to grow their... Like, I think biomechanics is super useful when someone has something that they struggle to grow or they have joint issues, right? Because we can't say that the old shit doesn't work. Like, there's some super jacked people who've been benching, squatting, deadlifting, and, you know, doing the Olympic lifts or using kettlebells. They're all fine. Too many people, when they get into biomechanics, think you have to throw all those things out. It's like, no, you don't. You're just trying to understand what those things are and what they represent to the person in front of you, who they best suit, and what they're best suited for. And for some people, they are very well suited to growing their chest with a bench press. They are. Because it's fucking obvious that they are, because they do a crap load of bench press, very little else, and they've got a massive chest. Whether or not they use steroids is a separate kind of discussion within that, because you can find both. So it's not that, but it is going, okay, but this person who keeps and I say this as one of those people, the bench press keeps hurting my shoulder every time I come all the way down with it. The back squat, just like your client, doesn't seem to be growing my quads, and yet I'm told that's the one I have to do for my quads. Or front squat. They're the two options. Front squat, obviously, a bit more because it's more upright, you know? Right? And that was kind of a given. And so I did that for years and years and years and years because I was persuaded of it, and I didn't know anything else. That's what everyone did. And so that's what I did. But I wasn't getting the results that other people were. And I was getting more joint niggles. And I just presumed, well, that's just the way it goes because that's what it's supposed to be like as you get older. But, you know, no, there's not really any research on 35-year-old dudes who are bench pressing and they're not that well built for bench pressing, because most research is done on university grads who are 20-something who rope half their mates in to take part in the study, and they last 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. At 20, you could sprint into a wall every single day for 6 months with a pint of vodka in your hand, douse yourself in petrol, set yourself on fire, get gonorrhea, and still turn up and smash a session. Like, it's not that indicative of when you're an actual PT working on the actual gym floor with actual people. Researchers are not trainers. They're not. And we put too many of them on a pedestal, and we value their opinion too much, I think. And I'm speaking to myself in the past. I valued their opinion too much. I thought they had the solutions. They had the answers for how I would get better results with my clients in there. But that's bullshit, because it was a bit like going in with the listening and the communication stuff. I already had my prepackaged answers because the research told me, which means I wasn't listening to my client and what they were saying, and I didn't have a skill set to adjust it for the client in front of me, which means I was wrong, right? And that's not to say that research doesn't serve its purpose, doesn't have a great place, and that we should dismiss it. We're not saying that either. But as a trainer, as someone who works with actual people who pay you money to do it, I promise you, you'd be better off finding some great mentors who have been trainers for over 10 years themselves than reading research.
And then you can see it for yourself with the mechanics as well. You don't have to rely on what they're telling you. You can actually see it. I'm going to swing it slightly differently now. How does the future look for your business? Do you think long term, or do you think short to medium term?
We probably think short to medium term. You know, we have a general sense of where we want to go. But so the PT project is 9 months old. So that's like, oh, we could have had a little baby. So it's about 9 months old. So the first things when we were founding that and getting it off was like, right, we need our first one-day event. Then we wanted a mentorship that people could do. So we got those out. They went very well. And so then it's kind of like, okay, now those are running. We want a continued mentorship thing for people who've been through the mentorship so they can keep kind of learning through that. And so it's kind of like fleshing those out. I'm currently I want to write a few ebooks because I get asked quite a lot, like, what biomechanics books would you recommend for someone who doesn't know anything about biomechanics? And the short answer is none of them, because they're all textbooks. And so they're there for like university professors while you're doing a course. They're full of shit that's just going to confuse you and terrify you and won't help you as a trainer. And so I was like, well, I could write that. And then I thought, that's going to take ages because there's loads to put into it. So I was going to make one, but I was like, that's going to take fucking a year and a half by the time I get through kind of all that. So the new plan is to chop it up and do them as a series. So the Personal Trainer's Guide to Biomechanics Forces Edition, then there'll be like an anatomy edition, then there'll be like a machine analysis kind of edition, and they'll layer into each other, and then you can do them all as a bundle type thing. So the ideas that I think me and Jimbo currently have for some of that stuff is, these are the products and how we want to help people and the stuff that we want to get out with these things. And then once those are there, it's then, okay, right, what do we see? How do we keep trying to change this? I've said before, but I think biomechanics is generally poorly communicated. I think lots of people don't necessarily know fully what they're saying with half the words that they're saying, but they're the only words they know how to say, and so they're sort of saying it by rote, which isn't that useful. and then you've got, I call it a mouthfucker thesaurus. Like, some people just look like they're trying to use the biggest possible words to say something. I'm like, you don't need to say it that way. Like, there's easy ways. And because also people are afraid to say when they don't understand what a sentence is. Like when someone learns what a moment arm is and the definition, I'm like, it's the perpendicular distance between an axis and a line of force. You're like, okay, what's perpendicular? And like, I've been in rooms and asked this question enough times. People go blank. Because we're sort of, perpendicular to me feels like one of those words that you feel like you should know what it means, but most people don't. It's like, okay, we want to try and create a space where it's okay to be like, dude, what the fuck does that word mean? Or what is that particular thing? Can you, like, I don't want you to just nod and be able to write the right answer to pass a particular thing, but not really know what to do with it. Because, you know, you're all trainers listening to this, hopefully. And trainers they're not theoretical creatures. We're not sat around a chalkboard writing equations and stuff. We're actually on a gym floor training a human being. And so any of the knowledge that you have, if it doesn't influence that in some way, I'm not saying don't learn it, but just know that it probably doesn't have that much to do with your job. So it needs to have something to do with the job. And so, you know, I would rather someone understood the principles and knew none of the words than knew all the words and not really understood the principles. Like, I can't teach biomechanics in Mandarin. Like, I don't know the words, but I could still create a hell of a training session. I could still put this random Chinese dude through a hell of a session as we do it, and just smile and thumbs up and move stuff kind of around without the words. But that wouldn't be true if you didn't really understand. Like, if you can't see a moment arm during an exercise, I do not care that you know the definition. That's the wrong way around. It's the wrong way around.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of the things I do with the trainers that I tutor. It's, can I just get you to parrot back to me?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's the easiest thing in the world, but can you understand the concept? Do you get what it gives us? Can you see these in the gym? That to me is far more important than you just being able to ask a question and you just being able to parrot the answer I gave you.
Yep.
And it's not even, I don't even care if you change a couple of the words so it's in your own words.
That's
I
cool.
want you to understand the concept and see it. And because I had to, because the first time I went with Michael, I was like, I'm just going to parrot Michael because this geezer knows what he's fucking talking about.
Yep.
But it took a couple more goes of going to a couple more of them and go, I really get it. I see it. I understand it. The principles around it is what's important. But that's what I realise is true of most things. You know, when you study any course, you know, you study a textbook and think I need to remember every fucking word on that page. And I used to try and do that. But now it's like, what is this page trying to say? Do I understand it? There's going to be some specificities within that, of course. But do I get what this page is trying to say? And what's applicable for me in my career to be able to help other people? Rather than just remember each and every fucking word, which is something I'm not capable of anyway. So I completely agree. And is that sort of with the PT project, is that with you and James wanting to create that environment going forward to basically just make it more accessible for more trainers to understand this shit?
Yeah, I think certainly for me, like, I think being a PT can be a great career. It can be a great job. It can be a super rewarding one. But I think it's missold when you first get into it. And, you know, that's why we see that hump of crap loads of trainers not making it past the first year, the first 18 months. If you can get past that, you probably know more about what the job is actually going to entail and stuff. But I think that's a shame. I think it has a lot to offer society kind of at large and the people who want to be trainers. It can be really rewarding intellectually, financially, from a lifestyle perspective and all the rest. But it won't be if you don't have the skill set to actually kind of go through and do all that. Even if you've got a great skill set, you're still going to probably take a couple of years to get to a point where you feel comfortable with everything, because that's just the nature of most stuff. Incidentally, I think our industry would be better off with an apprenticeship model than the kind of qualification model, but that's a separate issue. So it's that case of like, all right, if you're trying to get people excited by these, one of the questions I always try and ask myself when we're coming up with a way of demonstrating a point or getting people to learn it is, like, how can I create curiosity? How can I get someone to go, that's fucking weird, or that's interesting, or that's just funny, or that's quirky? And one of the reasons for that, one of my favorite YouTube lecturers, there's a guy called Walter Lewin who lectures at MIT on their first and second year physics degree. He does awesome demonstrations of the physics, right? So you learn all the calculations and stuff, but he's forever demoing it. And after every demo that he does, he says, see, physics is real, right? So he'll shoot things across the room. He'll pendulum himself across a whole room. He'll drop a bowling ball so it comes within an inch of his face but doesn't quite hit him. Like,
there's some ideas for Simon on it.
Yeah, right. And it's just way more engaging. And it's kind of, for me, you know, with a performing background, I was always like, when you get used to being in front of a crowd or an audience, you can tell when an audience is not engaged and when they are engaged, generally speaking. And you can't teach well if people aren't engaged. And so how do you get their engagement? I think first off, before you even attempt to teach something, you have to get curiosity, you have to get excitement, you have to get intrigue. You need something like that. So it's that moment of, okay, you know, when we do our 1-day introduction to biomechanics day, we call breaking down biomechanics, I open it with a dumbbell lat raise, and I ask the people on there, who reckons they can lift a 2.5 kilo dumbbell in a lat raise? And obviously everyone there are pretty much trainers or people who are very fond of training, so they all look at me like, well, of course I can, but I feel like there's a trap here, Paul. And they'd be right, there is a trap there. And so I'll pick on the biggest dude in the room, right? Like, you, sir, right? Come up here. You don't reckon you can lift 2.5 kilos? That's a bit pathetic. You're massive, right? And all I've done is I've attached a 2.5 kilo, those are 2.5 kilo by my foot, but I've also preset another 2.5 kilo dumbbell that I've attached to the end of a broomstick that's sort of just round the side. So I'll go and get that one. And this person has to do the dumbbell lat raise, but with a really long arm, effectively, because they've got to hold the end of the broom. And no one's got anywhere near to doing it yet. And even if I had Eddie Hall, if you get me a long enough broom, I'll make him fail, right? Because the principle is still the same. But it's a great moment where you go, that's weird. Why can't he do that? And it's just, you know, an extremer example of Michael asking the question of, why is the lat raise hardest here? I was like, well, I don't just want to ask it, I want to show it.
Yeah.
Like, I have a general principle I think is true for content creation as well, which is just show, don't tell. Like, the reason that full days of eating work well for people, even though half the fitness industry hates them, is because people learn by mimicking first. They don't learn by abstract theory first. And so, can I get you to experience that lat raise? Can I get you to experience the leg extension? Can I get you to experience a wall, if we're talking about resultants, can I get you to experience a wall squat and get you to shove in a particular direction that you go, why in the fuck was that harder? And change those experiences that then mean I can tell you about the theory afterwards in a way that now makes more sense to you, rather than how I think it's traditionally done, which is here's the theory and then the demonstration. So for most people, unless they're already invested, and I'm not saying you should never do it that way around. I think once people are a bit more advanced, cool, you can probably go at it from that perspective. But when you're trying to get new people interested in a topic, experience first, curiosity first, intrigue first, excitement first, then your theory, then come back and re-explore it with the new lens of why, and that's how it really solidifies in their brain in a way that I think is more engaging. So for me, it's not that I think most biomechanics stuff is necessarily incorrect. I just think it's poorly executed if the aim is to genuinely help trainers turn this into a career and not just something that they do for a year and then sack it off because it's not what they hoped it would be.
It was a mistake we made on the first seminar. We taught the theory.
Yeah.
And so we taught the theory, and what we didn't do, and we learnt this for the second one, which went much better, we taught the theory, and then we had a look at it, so that didn't engage people, they didn't get their imagination, and also we didn't show them well enough how it was applicable, how it was going to work to them on the gym floor.
Yeah.
So the second time what we did was the experience thing and go, okay, this is where this is great, this is where we can see stuff. Can you understand that? Can you feel the difference? Now, why do we think that is? Now let's come back and have a look at that. Yep. And actually, you're completely right. We learnt that through experience. It was like, those people weren't fucking engaged, and we got that nailed. We dealt that in exactly the right order.
Yeah.
And but what we'd forgotten, I'd certainly forgotten. I was like, yeah, but Michael didn't teach it like that. So Michael taught it through experience, then gave me the theory.
Yep.
I've got all excited about the theory, taught the theory first, then wondered why I didn't get the buy-in. Well, I was bought in before the theory.
Yep.
So, and I suppose that's like anything, isn't it? We want to understand first, well, how am I going to be able to use this? And then we can sort of explain the theory behind it.
Well, when you're learning any new concept, you're scaffolding it onto what you already know. And so it helps to have something that feels relevant to it. Like often when we're hearing, again, abstract stuff, people don't, abstract is useful, and I like talking in abstract terms, but it's a failing of mine if I engage with it too much if I'm trying to teach. Because people learn by specifics and examples and case studies and experience. Like, you know, we don't learn just by statistics and numbers. You know, Stalin once said that a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And he's right. Like, we shouldn't necessarily care more about the one sob story we watch on the news versus the stat that 300,000 people have died in Darfur. But we do. Undeniably we do. We get, no, look, I can see the person in there crying and there's a sad story going on here. Those numbers don't feel like they mean anything. Theory, if we're not careful, doesn't mean anything. It has to relate to that experience first. But you guys just did what you said earlier, which was going, well, you planned something, you executed it, and then you assessed it, and then tweaked it the next time so that, okay, where do we think we went wrong with this? We didn't engage them. Okay, well, how do we solve that problem? Okay, we need to create something for them to experience it first. If, you know, that's all you try and do is iterate on top of that and go, what is the best way of doing this particular thing? And I think that's true of whether you're coaching or educating. It's the same principle.
Right. We are you going to say something, mate?
No, I was just going to sort of summarise really and just go, yeah, I mean, I think that was, spot on, Paul, actually. It's great hearing you talk today. And, yeah, I think Dan's going to sort of think about wrapping things up. But
I was only because of the time.
I mean, we're like, fucking hell, I pay for 2 hours.
Honest,
you know, I can put us out in a minute. We could be here for another 3 hours.
I need the toilet.
I've been needing a piss for a while.
You know, I've just like moving more and more around. And it's like, is there a toilet in here? I don't think there is. I think I'm locked in anyway. Yeah, so that's why we're going to wrap it up. Is basically because we all need a piss. We all need a piss, and we're about to get kicked out anyway. So that's the fucking end of that. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
Thanks for having me.
2 hours have flown by. And we've split it really nicely, deliberately by us, because of the way our day is set up. James's passion for psychology and communication and relationship building, that obviously I take a lot from, and the mechanic side of thing, which is my passion. So between the two of us, we'd like to, which is brilliant and unplanned. When you first asked you what a coach was, you actually split it into those two things, which we completely agree with, and is how our seminar is designed. It's designed around the mechanics and the gym floor, and then it's designed around, okay, let's get to understand the person and the communication. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm sure we'll do it again soon.
Please.
But we're going to go out for a bit of dinner, aren't we?
Yeah, maybe a beer, mate.
Maybe a beer.
Yeah, but thanks, Paul. Really,
hang out with
really
James in his really tight jeans.
They're not just tight. Oh, my quads are just massive, mate. Let's get this right, mate, all right?
They're not tight. Everything in them is massive. That's the trouble.
And he means everything. As well. It's been distracting seeing that.
I can see Paul's eyes just drop down.
It's like, what is he saying? Look at
what is going on there? Fucking hell, mate.
Right, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, on that fucking bombshell, and we'll catch you next week.